Hello, everybody. Thank you for logging in at a little bit later time. This is the first time that we've tried this at 6:30, so hopefully this works out for you. And again, I'm kind of enjoying being in the studio doing this, and I think it just gets better. I hope as we go along. Again, I'm always interested in your feedback on what you like or you don't like about these live stream programs, and appreciate people getting on here early and throwing some questions out there right off the bat. One of the things that I hope to talk about a little bit here as we get into it is I did have a video. I finished a video today on basically the first initiative and referendum that's out there right now, and some of the other initiatives that are coming up. But at least this will be the first, I think, in a series to talk about those initiatives and referendums, so you can become aware of what's actually going to be out there in front of the stores or at some of the events you might be going to here in Washington State. Also, I did a video, and I'm probably going to start doing a series of these videos teaching people how to file different types of PDC, Public Disclosure Commission complaints, essentially campaign finance complaints. And then if that's something that people are interested in, then I'll start to get into more details on like ethics complaints and things like that. There's no super secret sauce here on doing this. I just find that it remains a mystery to most people because they haven't gone and experimented with it themselves. And since I've done a lot of that, you might as well learn the lessons from me. And if I can teach people how to do it, my guess is that some people will get involved and start to do it better than I do. And the more of us that are doing that, the better, in my opinion. So I'm hoping that you find that interesting and useful and helpful for the people that are interested in getting more engaged as an activist or filing complaints against politicians and PACs and political parties. Makes you feel like you're doing something good, and I'm sure it annoys the people who get the complaints, but it's a good way to kind of get the ball rolling. Jason has a question here. We'll start out with just some of the questions that you're asking, just to make it easier. If you're able to do at We the Govern, just makes it easier for me to spot the questions, especially if it becomes kind of a busy, crowded comment section field right now. It's starting out slow, which is fine. But that's the main thing that I wanted to just remind people, if they can remember to do that. One of the questions Jason has here: what's your thoughts on Gavin Newsom's 28th Amendment? Yeah, and will Washington State sign on to it? Well, it's a really difficult process to get an amendment to the Constitution passed. Even well-funded and heavily supported federal constitutional amendments take a long time to get through. And so Gavin Newsom's obviously just doing an anti-Second Amendment constitutional recommendation there because it's basically just a stunt, a political campaign stunt. I don't think even he thinks it's reasonable or even likely. And I don't even know that it's reasonable that Washington State would sign on to it. It kind of depends on the process that you'd probably go through there, but I don't think Washington State would actually end up being one of them. We may have a crazy governor who doesn't, and certainly an AG who's hostile to freedom and self-defense and all that. But we do have a bare majority right now, but I don't think you're going to see that that's how it actually ends up coming down by the time it would get to Washington. I think that's just, like I said, it's an ego project that Newsom sounds good, so he has something to talk about in the wine and cheese circuit that I'm sure he travels around in all the time. So I don't necessarily I don't think that's going to necessarily go anywhere. The Tony has a question here about what is your recommendation on looking up candidates running for office in Washington? And I'm assuming that you're asking that question because of 2023, and you probably, anywhere you live in Washington, for the most part, you're going to have somebody on the ballot here. It's an off-year election. That's usually school board races. That's the largest chunk of people that are running for office. But you also have a lot of city council races that are up for election. If you're a charter county, you probably have county commission or county level offices. If you have a fire department in your area, you're going to have fire district positions, fire commissioners, port commissioners sometimes. Thurston County has a couple of key commission races, even though we're a commission county, not a charter county. And that's mainly because of the population level that Thurston County hit and that recent change in state law that basically moves it from a 3 to 5 commissioner commission. And so there's the 2 new seats that they have coming up for elections. And I'll probably be doing a video on at least one of those seats and just why it matters overall in Thurston County with who you elect there. So what I do is obviously voters guide statement's important. And that's an easy way to look at somebody's campaign. I would look at who's donating to them, go to pdc.wa.gov and look and see if you can see people who are donating to their campaign, or look and see who's endorsed them. Those are ways at least you can get a sense, especially if it's a nonpartisan position, which a lot of them this time of year in an off-year election, a lot of them are nonpartisan. Look at who the progressives have endorsed. Those are always the worst people running for office. So when in doubt, usually you can vote the opposite way of their recommendations, and you're pretty safe in that case. Look, you will see some people that are sometimes able to kind of cross the partisan divide and get people from both sides to support them. But mostly the Democrats are usually really good, and the progressives in particular are really good at focusing on their candidates. So they'll be endorsing candidates pretty much right away. And that at least gives you an idea of who the worst candidate is on the ballot that cycle. So that's something you can look at there. Lancelot got a question. Is optimism possible? Children hidden from parent protection over life-altering surgery, drug ruin. Absolutely. I mean, this is, again, I think I've talked about this in some previous Ask Me Anything events or live streaming things. And this comes up sometimes in some of my public presentations that I do around the state. But the optimism is always there. And for some reason, conservatives, if they have a setback, have a tendency to throw their hands up in the air and just surrender. I don't understand that instant approach. You'll notice that people on the left almost never take that approach. They get demoralized, but they don't just throw their hands up and say, "Oh, I surrender," and give up. Listen, the left has been active for 150 years, right? Pushing hard on trying to destroy individual freedom and liberty. It's been an agenda of theirs, even when they have massive setbacks like the collapse of the Berlin Wall, or when the Russian Revolution was exposed for its violence. Whatever it is, they'll go back, they'll regroup, they'll come up with some other approach, and they'll keep pushing forward. I don't understand why people who love liberty and freedom and care about them and recognize it as just the highly unusual situation we find ourselves in today, that we've inherited this from our forefathers, the opportunity to save it. Why would you just throw your hands up and surrender? So there's no, it's coming to an end. I don't quite get that. That's a really common demeanor and attitude, I think, on the conservative side of the political spectrum. So yes, right now, Washington State, but we're not alone. We passed the stupidest it's Senate Bill 5599. And so one of the initiatives of one of the referendums right now that they're collecting signatures for right this minute are addressing those issues. However, why would you say optimism is not possible? It does still require somebody to groom the child and convince them to run away. And so some of that requirement's still there. If you have a good relationship with your kid, and then I don't think your kid's particularly vulnerable to this right now. If you're having problems with your child, then I'd be more concerned, because if they're going through some kind of rebellious stage, then it's possible somebody could kind of recognize that and glom onto them and try to groom them away to be exposed to some of these problems. I mean, listen, to some extent, like when you become an adult, there's a lot of stupid and dumb things you can do to yourself, and you can make a lot of dumb and bad choices. At some point, we live in a free country where you're going to be able to make a lot of bad and dumb choices. However, it's wise to protect children so they can't make those dumb choices and life-changing choices too young. And that's generally been recognized in society. It's kind of the first time, I think, in recent times that there's been a more aggressive willingness to kind of throw those ideas out and let kids do this. So it's a terrible situation right now. And there's always optimism. One thing to remember about that particular law, moving away or running away from it is foolish, because essentially the way the law is structured, you can move to Idaho or Wyoming, wherever you want. But the law is actually set up to let kids come in from other states and then conceal their identity or where they are from law enforcement from those states and from their parents from those states as well. So if you're running a problem with your kid and this is your concern and you try to move to another state, that's not going to protect you from it, unfortunately, the way it's set up. So it's worth defeating. It's worth defeating now, and it's worth really confronting it. Craig, if you were to pick 3 different states to move to where would you go? I personally, I don't want to move at all. There's a lot of benefits to Washington State living here geographically, economically, and the environment here and all that. They recently had a story out of Kellogg, Idaho, right? One of the most conservative areas in America, period. And the school where this kid got up and he said, guys are guys and girls are girls. What a radical statement. So because he made that statement in this school district in one of the most conservative areas in America, in Idaho, he was told that he couldn't go to graduation. Then when some parents protested, the school decided to shut down graduation for everybody. And then that same kid lost the job that he had basically been accepted for at the fire department because of that statement in Idaho, in one of the most conservative places in America today. The problem with thinking that you can run away is that all you're going to discover when you get there is this idea that just because some Republicans are elected to office, you're going to discover that the Republicans that are elected in those states, unfortunately, have absolutely no idea what they're fighting. In most cases, there's a good percentage of the Republicans in Idaho, Wyoming, South Dakota, North Dakota, doesn't really matter where, Texas, that actually probably weren't Republicans or certainly didn't believe in liberty and freedom when they were elected. And so they're not going to be bulwarks of defense just because they have an R next to their name. Secondly, because the left doesn't let anybody, the one thing to remember about the left is that, and socialism in general, is it can't function as an island because it's exposed. If it's exposed to the alternative, an opportunity for freedom and liberty somewhere, it collapses the leftist experiment. It always does. So in order for them to retain kind of this utopian, lefting-leaning kind of scheme, this collectivist sort of scheme, they have to basically absorb everybody so that there's no alternative at all. That's the only way the left works. So thinking you run away from it is at best postponing things, the inevitable, by a couple of years at the most. But I think the left is active in every state in America, and I don't know where you go. America is the last best hope for freedom and liberty in the country, despite all our problems, despite all the other issues. I think we're the last best hope. So I don't know that there's another state that you could go to that you would have a better chance. There's a lot of benefits in Washington State too. I mean, despite the attacks on the hydroelectric dam, our electrical grid here is probably, in theory, one of the most stable in the country. Inslee may be trying to destroy it, or the leftists might be trying to destroy it, but it probably is. We actually grow a phenomenal amount of food here. It's a great place to grow food. If you live in Western Washington, it is, even incompetent people can grow food pretty easily. There's a lot of natural resources in Washington. If things got really bad, we actually happen to have quite a bit of those locally. So I don't think you're going to find, our climate's relatively mild. There's a lot of other benefits here. I love Washington State. I'm not going anywhere. And I don't know that I'd want to move to any other state at all. I don't think I never will. So those are my thoughts on that. I'm obviously biased. Let's see, Jason, the question about how bad would a potential recession affect Washington State? Well, Washington State has historically withstood most depressions or economic downturns fairly well. There's a couple of reasons. Some of them are just a matter of geography. Some of them are just a matter of historical accident. But I would say the time in the late 60s when Boeing really had a massive downturn, in the early 70s, that was probably one of the bigger economic downturns, at least in the last 70 years or so in Washington. And it was because of this dependency on one business. And it really did affect things quite a bit. It was really cheap to buy homes around that time here in Washington. Washington isn't quite dependent on that type of monoculture, sort of single source business that really controls or impacts everything. Maybe the closest you get to that now would be like Microsoft or something. And I would expect if you had a really bad recession that was genuinely pretty significant here, Washington would probably fare better than a good percentage of the rest of the country. Part of the reason is just the variety of options that people have for employment in Washington. There are actually fairly big variety. Another thing is that historically, Washington's had one of the highest entrepreneurial rates by population of any country in America, or any state in America, sorry. And so you tend to have people here that are very innovative. People have attributed that to just this high concentration of people that have moved here over the last century, who tend to be engineers, and their kids tend to be more entrepreneurial and more into making things. And even though Boeing's headquarters moved out, generations of people who are basically familiar with entrepreneurship still live here. And so I think that it's not as, we're likely to probably weather the storm a little bit better. Let's see. There is a question here. Your thoughts on how to address the gun violence. This is from Mayor Bobear. The thoughts on how to address the gun violence. Well, I mean, I think you have to look at what type of gun violence you're talking about. Criminal activity, so gun violence that is a result of criminal activity, is only going to be stopped when you're willing to actually put criminals in prison where they can't go out and commit more crimes. And if there's a sense that there's actual punishment for crime, then I think you're just going to have a less violence in that area. Listen, these studies are so old that you have to be a complete blundering idiot to not be familiar with the fact that the vast majority of crimes are always going to be committed by a teeny fraction of the population. The whole concept of 3 strikes and you're out in Washington, when they passed that by initiative back in, I think it was 1994, if I remember right, the whole idea, recognized by every single social scientist that's ever bothered to study the field, is that a very small percentage of the population, again, commits violent crime. So when you catch these people who have committed violent crime and they clearly aren't willing to reform, and you put them in prison, the longer they stay in prison, the bigger the number of crimes they don't commit, the fewer people that are victimized. So if you put those habitual criminals in prison, you greatly reduce the violence, not just gun violence, all violence. And it actually has a across-the-board impact on the rest of the crime structure as well. So that's number one. If you talk about gun crime in the sense of use of firearms and things like suicide or in accidents, you address that very differently. You address accidents by better education, better training. Accidental gun deaths are probably the lowest now than I think they've ever been. And a lot of that, I think, just goes with better education over time. You did see a pretty big change over like a 50-year window of accidental gun deaths. And then suicide, which is the other thing that oftentimes gets lumped into gun violence here. It has more to do with the mental health situation. If people are going to commit suicide, they tend to want to find a way. Firearms are one way that they can use to commit suicide. And again, people doing bad things to themselves, it's very hard to completely prevent that from happening. But you can do some of that by taking it a little bit more seriously. And I think, we do tend to abuse the prescription drug program in our country at a bizarre and out of control way. And I think that there's a lot of either willfully misunderstood side effects of some of these the drugs that are habitually given to people and over prescribed over time. The vast majority of people that have been involved in significant gun violence sort of events, most of them are on some kind of medication, or they have been. Anyway, I don't know if that necessarily answers that question, but that's sort of how I would start to work on it. TZ is mentioning it's referendum 101. That's reject. Okay. So TZ, it's not really a question, but maybe this is a clarification. You're talking about referendum 101 that's focused on rejecting SB 5599, which is the referendum that people are collecting signatures on. In fact, I have some laying around here. But there's also an initiative, which is 2081, that restores parent rights in a piece just across the spectrum, not just in education and medicine, but it basically hits this whole field where the state has been actively trying to separate parents from their kids, or at least to be involved in their children's lives, which is exactly the opposite of what they've been claiming that they've wanted for decades. And I think that you really want to have both pass if you can. Referendum 101, which essentially rejects 5599, is a defensive measure, right? They pass a bad idea. Our defense is to come back and repeal it. Initiative 2081, I believe, has an impact on. It's a little bit more of a aggressive step in the sense that we're actually expanding the scope of parental rights, restoring parents the primary stakeholder in their children's education and medical care for all things. And it's just ridiculous. Let's see. There's a question here. Chris has a question. I'm a state employee and we're being offered $1,000 incentive to get up-to-date COVID booster shots. Does this violate state ethics laws? I don't think that by definition that violates the ethics laws. I think it's unethical. And there's a difference between violating the ethics laws and whether it's unethical. I wouldn't take that bet. And it seems a bizarre incentive that they're still offering you. I think it's a poor use of taxpayer dollars in addition to probably encouraging people to do dangerous things to themselves. But it's probably not a specific violation of ethics laws. Let's see. Here's a question from Jason. Does Inslee or Ferguson have any documents floating around? Will they be arrested and in prison for 100 years? No, I doubt it. Just because you have unethical and dishonest and bad politicians doesn't mean that there's some kind of mythical justice that people are going to necessarily have because they're doing the wrong thing. It is incredibly rare that you'll have politicians actually punished the same way or treated the same way in the application of the law when they're caught breaking the law. It's just very rare. It happens. I mean, I know governors in Illinois, right, have been jailed time after time. We've got 3 governors, I think, in Illinois that went to prison. You had the governor in Oregon, the Democrat, after he got elected, had to step down almost right away because of some serious violations. He didn't go to prison. He just had to bail out of politics. And I think you're more likely to have outcomes like that where they basically get shunned or removed. I mean, look, you had Mayor, the former mayor of Seattle, who was caught. The Seattle Times actually covered up the story for many years that he was caught molesting, taking advantage and molesting and abusing young drug addicts, knowing that they'd probably not be willing to or be able to come forward and truthfully expose him. And Mayor Murray, and I mean, his political career was over, but they still went and hired him with some 6-figure job, kind of hiding him in the corner and, hiding in the background. He's still around. He doesn't have a political future, but he's still out there doing things. So neither Inslee nor Ferguson are likely to have that kind of justice necessarily imposed on them, even if they deserve it. There are corruption problems that both Inslee and Ferguson will probably have to face. Ferguson, more importantly, because he's putting his name on the ballot. The biggest corruption, I'd say the top 3 corruption issues that Ferguson's going to have to face, one way or the other, is the fact that his office has been caught multiple times, repeatedly, concealing and destroying and hiding public records in an effort to conceal just how bad or incompetent or dishonest the state of Washington is in different scenarios. And Ferguson's office is explicitly and directly implicated in that, and presumably with Ferguson's direction. So everything from the Oso landslide scandal, where his office destroyed and concealed a bunch of records, to the recent case where they were fined millions of dollars for trying to hide records about the abuse of a disabled person in one of the state programs. Those are what we know of. It's pretty likely and almost certain that under Ferguson's direction that's exactly how the AG's office has operated, just incredibly unprofessionally and very dishonestly, and they've been destroying records for a long time. They've probably done a pretty good job purging their office of anybody who has independent or honest thought or is ethical. So I'm not sure how many whistleblowers you'll get, but you may get some. Remember, there's still a Democrat on Democrat fight that's going on here. And Hillary Franz has a lot of connections and access to a lot of resources. So I think that her ego is going to drive her into a pretty aggressive battle with Ferguson. And there's likely to be Franz supporters that are within that office, inside the AG's office. So anyway, I think that's one scandal. Second scandal you have is Ferguson's kickback scheme to attorneys that give money, hiring those attorneys for outside legal counsel or additional counsel, because 600 attorneys that work for the AG's office apparently isn't enough. So they have to contract out and they have to do a lot more work. And I think that there's quite a bit of scandal there. I don't even think that's illegal. I just think it's, and of course not, they've made it so there's a way to make that legal and not specifically in violation of the ethics laws, but it stinks and it's ugly and it should be exposed. And there's probably some other issues like that. John, you have a question here. What are your personal views on SB1 or SB Senate Bill 1240? And do you think it will take long to get it tossed? And 1240, I think, is the gun bill, anti-gun bill. We're in court right now. It's hard for me to know exactly when that gets thrown out. It is illegal, in my opinion, both in violation of state and federal constitution. You have to have a federal lawsuit to ultimately throw it out, because the state judges are really dishonest, I think, and probably pretty delusional, and lack the ability to understand the English language, at least as it's been written in the state constitution. So I don't think they interpret things correctly at all. You have to go. Federal cases are the only ones that you can, I think, really fight on that issue. And I'm looking forward to the day that one's thrown out. Scooter, you have a question. Do you ever plan on running for state or local office? The answer right now is no, I don't. I have run for office before, both successfully and unsuccessfully at times. I actually enjoyed being on the school board when I was on the school board for a couple of cycles. I learned quite a bit in that process. And actually, it's something I encourage everybody to do, especially if you're relatively ignorant about how government works. You get tremendous educational benefit in being in that position and understanding how it operates, at least, the process, the Robert's Rules of Orders. I mean, just there's a lot of benefit I think you get out of being in one of those, especially on a local position like that. You want to make sure you don't lose your soul or lose sight of what you're trying to achieve when you get in there. It seems to be common that people do that, but I think it's really beneficial for most people to do it. I know I really benefited a lot from being there. The reason why I'm not interested in running for a position is that I'm heavily engaged and involved in the political process right now as somebody from the outside, trying to train activists, trying to train people to run for office, working on projects that interest me, exposing corruption and incompetence in government, writing stories, doing videos like this, even this type of stuff. And I think I can have more influence and be more effective in that capacity. And I don't think it's as easy a position to find somebody to do. So it's the one that feels right to me. And it's part of my crusade, I think, for freedom and liberty. That's the part that I feel good about. So I don't think I have any plans for that. That being said, I also don't have any plans to work for government. There has been efforts in the past to bribe me with positions on like the Shoreline Hearings Board before. But the one type of thing that I would be interested in doing is if we did get a real governor in here who wanted to fix Washington State, I completely volunteer to be the person who goes in there and helps them cut the state government. Got a lot of ideas on that. There's tens of thousands of bureaucrats that I can think of that need to go get a real job somewhere else. And we have entire agencies that just need to be eliminated. Puget Sound Partnership, the Evergreen State College. I mean, just pointless, useless entities that removing them is a net benefit to society and the world at large. But you're going to have people willing to come in there and actually do the hard work to do that. I'm totally willing to do that. And that's what I would like to do. Jason, you're right about moving. I see the left in Missouri, attacking Second Amendments. I know they're attacking everything really around the world. One thing to remember about moving, and this is important, if I lived in a city, I would probably want to get out of a city. I still think that it's healthier and it's more stable and it's easier to know your neighbors if you live more rurally. I live very rural. You don't have to live as rural as I do, but as rural as you can get. And I think that there's a lot of benefits to that. You get to know your neighbors well. It's easier to kind of know who's around you, to have kind of a community interaction with people that have different skills around you that you can kind of trade services for if you ever needed to. Somebody to watch your place when you're gone, or you watch their place when they're gone, or help out. It's more of a sense of community that you're tied in directly and you understand and know your neighbors a little bit better. And you're not as caught up in potential problems with bigger collapse scenarios that could happen. Our state's run by incompetent people right now. And so there's dumb decisions they could do with the power grid or something like that could have a bigger impact on you. I would get out of the city. If I lived in a city, I would get out of a city. I wouldn't move out of the state because, especially in very changing times right now, most of us who have lived here for a long time have a friend or family or just connection network that's taken probably years, maybe decades to build. People that trust you, people that know you, people who you've been able to work with and they can work with you. And there's a lot of handshake deals that might go on in that sort of situation, especially if you're in tough times. Imagine moving to a new community where nobody knows you from Adam and you're just the lib that moved from Washington State. And now you've got to build that back up. And if there's tough times, you're not the person that anybody's going to trust or necessarily believe they can trust when you move in, no matter what you try to say. So I think that's important to kind of remember. So anyway, so that's my assessment there. There's been a lot more comments coming up here, and some of these are questions TZ, you have a question? Do you have thoughts about the group bonds for the win? No, I don't. Don't know what I should know about them. Then Lancelot, you got a question here is, will Seattle revive or recuperate? Seattle's going to have the hardest part of Washington. That's going to be the hardest part of Washington State to recover, I think, in case of a serious downturn, because they're really doing a great job of self-immolating downtown. I mean, listen, just go there. They've recruited all these drug addicts to come in there and live in the city, trash it, build tent camps and tent cities. Sure, they've moved some of the camps around a little bit now, but most of them are in some terrible situation. The public schools are collapsing. Parents who have any control at all over the kids are pulling them out. A lot of the businesses are shutting down. They don't want to operate in downtown Seattle for the same reason they don't want to operate in Portland or San Francisco, right? Because it's just theft is really bad and the police are under attack. And so you do have a significant upsurge of crime. So Seattle's going to take a while to recover. If I hadn't personally witnessed it myself in New York City, I would say that it would take forever, right, to recover. It would take a lot longer. But I lived in New York City under the Dinkins administration when I was a college student, and I left. And I remember bringing Rudy Giuliani to campus, and he made a presentation. I was chair of the college Republican, so I thought I should bring in the Republican mayor candidate, even though I thought he had no chance of winning. And he won in 1994. You get this Republican as new mayor of New York City. And I remember thinking, what could he really do? Because New York City just seemed like a lost cause to me. I mean, I came home completely happy to come and get out of the East Coast. And the speed at which an effective leader demonstrated that he could turn around the city as he did in New York City with far worse problems than I think anybody in Seattle has any concept of experiencing. To watch him do that was pretty impressive. And it gives me actually a lot more hope in the ability to turn around an urban center that's decayed. So Seattle's nowhere near what New York City was under the Dinkins administration, and nowhere near. If you think you are even close to it, it's because you're ignorant about what crime was really like in New York City. My sophomore year, I remember 2,200 people or so were murdered within 10 miles of my dorm room. And it was just another year. I mean, crime was really, really bad. So I think that Seattle can recover. It would take some exceptional leadership there, and it's going to have to take somebody who's got ties to the city and loves the city and wants to change it, and they're willing to convince the people that they care enough to do that. You're not going to turn Seattle around by attacking Seattle. I attack Seattle all the time. I'm the wrong guy to run Seattle, but somebody there is going to rise to the occasion at some point in time. It'd be nice if it's sooner rather than later. Jason has a question, thoughts on Seattle not passing a drug possession law. This is really interesting because Seattle did elect a pretty good person for their attorney. It's kind of like the equivalent of their local prosecutor. And Ann Davidson did a pretty good job pushing this reform in conjunction with a lot of Democrats. And they missed it by one vote on the Seattle City Council to restore some level of sanity as it has to do with the drug possession charges there. Now, because they didn't do that, it's going to probably become a magnet for more drug addicts coming to Seattle, at least probably from the surrounding communities that have kind of been pushed out to the surrounding communities. And I think it's going to probably attract more drug addicts coming back into the city. But anyway, that's what a stupid decision. And that was just one guy. That was all you had to do, is just have one of the, because there were four people that are also, I would disagree with in everything, but they still voted for this. So they had some level of sanity left in them. And all they had is that one person that flipped. So let's see. Here's a question right here from Meg. What would it take to run an initiative to repeal the Climate Commitment Act? Is it something that is realistic without sharing the same fate as 1976 with the current political climate? 1976, I'm assuming, I-976. Yeah, $30 car tabs. You would have to it is possible to run an initiative. You can repeal that. There might be a better way to get rid of it too. But that is achievable and it can be done. And obviously the legal challenges as they go together down the road are a little bit hard to resolve, but probably trying to be as careful as you can. You got a good shot at it and you might as well try. There are, let's see, Kristen, here's Kraken. Question: does any government have the right to deny you your own property? Well, they shouldn't. I think they do it more often than not. The question is, are taxes denying you the right to your property? I would argue they are. In which case, you have to there's always the argument that comes up. This is a long property rights discussion here, but Um, it really has more to do, especially with property taxes. So property taxes can be significantly abused. The first real um, effort in Washington State when it came to the initiatives were passed as Amendment Number 7 back in 2012 to the Washington State Constitution. One of the first things that Washingtonians ran initiatives on was to actually control taxes. In fact, they did it time after time after time, and they were fighting to keep taxes down, to eliminate taxes, and it was a big fight back then. It's really worth going back to understand your history because that's a common theme. And eventually, the legislature came in and passed a constitutional amendment to control taxes because it was very obvious people were pissed off about it. It took them about 12 years or so of these initiatives and fights over it, which I think have been brewing for about 20 years total. So I don't think you ever give up and surrender. Conservatives have a terrible habit. Again, I'm repeating myself, but they have a terrible habit. We seem to have a habit that's self-destructive, and that is that you don't win the miracle solution and throw your hands up and you give up and run away. That seems to be a common theme. I don't get it, but it is. And it's not one that's going to lead to a successful outcome. Sometimes you grind away on something and success comes at random times when you aren't expecting it. Sometimes after a long fight where it seems like you're losing but you're able to convince people over a period of time. Let's see, any updates on our part-time attorney general, full-time seeker of gubernatorial donations, Sideshow Bob's governor election? There's not a lot of updates on that right now, but I do think that we're early days in the drama on this race, and we still have a long ways to go. So I spoke up in Skagit County last week. I sat next to Sammy Byrd, spoke after him actually at the event. I had a good conversation with him. Obviously, if he was governor, we'd be in much better shape than any of the Democrat clowns. There is, I think I mentioned Mark Mullet has officially decided he's the Democrat from the 5th Ledge District senator in the 5th Ledge District in the Issaquah area who Inslee hates and has tried to remove from office once. And I think he recognizes the Democrats are going to destroy him because he's unfortunately aware that math is real and he believes that it's real, which is a really big handicap if you're a Democrat. You really have to deny math exists at all, I think, in order to be successful moving up the food chain in the Democrat Party. So Mark is under significant attack from that. So he said he's going to run for governor as kind of this business-friendly, sane Democrat. I just don't know if there's a lane for him in the campaign. And so you're more likely to get a solid Republican come through than a Democrat like that. I know there's a lot of people establishment people and lobbyists who'd like to see Mark Mullet get elected. And Mark would be a much better person than any Democrat that we've had in the last 20 years. But I don't know what the odds are of that actually him being able to pull it off. He would have to show that he's raising a lot of money and has a miracle sort of background, groundswell of people, because he's going to keep the D next to his name and he's not going to have a single Democrat activist helping him. So I'm not sure how that works. Let's see. Yeah, here's a question. Jason, is it true that Bob Ferguson likes to admire himself in the mirror and play? Yeah. I'm too sexy for my shirt. I don't know. Who knows? He's a weird guy. I know he is, but we don't really want to know him any better. I mean, at least if he's filing and he's running, it'd be nice for him to get bounced out of office and we'd have him no longer as AG and no longer and certainly not as governor. TZ Burton, the question here, Glenn, any thoughts on a statewide electoral college like we have for president to offset rural versus urban voting? And how would we propose that? This has been brought up many times before, and this is essentially, mostly it's around the county idea. You have 39 counties in Washington State, so in theory, each one would get an electoral college sort of approach to electing the governor, similar to what you do at the federal level with states electing the president. In order to do that, somehow you would actually have to have it would have to be an amendment to the Constitution, number one. Number two, you would have to have, which would require a majority of the legislature to support it, and you'd have to have the majority of the people support it. So that would be tough. And mainly because of urban voters feel like they would lose. So King, Pierce, and Snohomish would probably vote against it. Probably Spokane would vote against it. And it would be very hard to offset that just population wise. So I like the idea, actually. I do think that there's a lot of merit to electoral college approach because it moderates extremes when it comes to regulation and legislation. So I like the idea. But anyway, That's how it goes. Um, Jason, you have a question here. Where did the Build Back Better slogan come from, and what exactly are we building back better? Yeah. Well, the Build Back Better slogan is, of course, one of these phrases that they come out after probably spending millions of dollars in consultant time and surveys and polling and psychological studies on what they think they can get away with. They being this elite kind of corporate sort of elite that tends to push a lot of these ideas. Um, if you remember some of the UN bills that they've had out there, it's not a conspiracy theory. I mean, it's just Agenda 21, all that kind of stuff. There's always been this desire to have central planning and these utopian sort of planning schemes. Again, ignorance of history tends to have people overreact to the stuff that they see now that has been going on for a long, long time. I remember reading a story from it was early teens, so over 100 years ago, 110 years ago. There was a big fight in Russia before the Bolshevik Revolution, but it was the Bolsheviks and the Mensheviks. And the Mensheviks had come up with this utopian city structure, very similar actually to the 15-minute walking city idea that they have now, because these ideas never change. The left never has a unique idea ever. They just come up with a new way to package the same old idea over again. And so the Bolsheviks and the Mensheviks were debating about this, and the Mensheviks had come up with this great idea for this utopian city, and that was their push for control, total control of the people and how to organize it, mass transit between cities, kind of imagine like the Hunger Games approach. That was really, they wanted to have these really controlled cities with big stretches and connected. Anyway, it was, this is an old idea, and the new people are going to come up with different slogans to push it, but that's exactly how they always want to do that, to try to control you. TZ, there's a question, is there any way to bring back the state mental hospitals for homeless, or does that take state legislative action? It would take state legislative action for two things. One is properly funding, and two would be getting establishing the support and probably some of the laws that they would need to fix to make the ability to take somebody who, by their own actions, are basically, they need the mental help and the support that they would get in that kind of environment, not just for themselves, but for the people that they victimize around themselves. It's not all for homeless, but it's a lot of the homeless people. There's a percentage, 15-20% or so of the homeless population that is dealing with probably some significant mental health problems. And under the last three or four Democrat governors, they have actively done everything they can to destroy the mental health system in Washington state, defund it, shut it down. I'm not a big government guy. I don't think government should be involved in everything. But when it comes to at some point in time, you need a safety net for the mental health situation. And when that falls apart, as it has completely in this state, you create this unethical and immoral sort of situation that we see today, where all these people are out here going through horrific public society breakdowns, and the Democrats' approach is just throw them out on the street and give them a tent and a needle and some drugs, apparently, and that's their solution. Let them hurt people, let them hurt themselves, let them commit suicide. They don't care, and that is it. We got to resolve that. So the one thing that Republicans, it's not the only thing, but there's a couple things that Republicans have genuinely been fairly unified on, is they have historically, at least in the last 20 years, have supported trying to enhance or improve the mental health program in Washington state. And it's amazing how hostile to that idea the Democrats have been almost universally. Individual Democrats have been pretty good at times. You've occasionally had some that are. I don't think there's any now left in the legislature, but there were some that were pretty good. And it's just they've been really opposed to that. Jason, the question here right now, whatever happened to $30 car tabs? Well, $30 car tabs, you voted for them 3 times. 1998 is when they first came up. That was Iman's second successful initiative he's involved in, but the first one that he really grabbed onto and ran and got passed back in 1998. And even it was actually thrown out in court. But what happened at the time is the legislature and the governor said, hey, the people have spoken, and they imposed it as policy. And then, of course, the grifting operations that exist in local government, they want that cash, right? They want to find the cash that just went away. And so I remember, because I had a car, a little junker car that I was paying $250 in car tabs back then. So it was great to go down to $30 car tabs. And so then what happens is they come up with So these other ways of increasing the car tabs. They built it up, so he runs another one. It passes. That one gets thrown out in court. But again, they realize they have to restructure some things. And then finally, the third time, he runs it again, which is I-976. That one got thrown out in court. There were some. Anyway, you can go back and you look at some of the legal details on what happens. That was clearly hostile to the people's will. People are upset about it. And I still think the $30 car tabs fight is less about the $30 car tabs than it is about the idea that do the people have the ability to hold their elected officials accountable to a policy that clearly the people want, regardless of whatever special interests are continuing to push it through. In many ways, it's very identical to the fight that you saw back in the 1920s and early 30s, where the progressive, which means something different back then than it does today, but the people who were activists who were really fighting to keep these taxes down, and they kept being stymied in every way, until they eventually found a solution, and they were successful about that. So it's something to keep in mind. I would bring that back, man. If I was governor or I got in charge of the legislature, I'd push that through as a policy right now. And who cares? Just force them to say, listen, the people have spoken 3 times. We're going to do it. It's not the biggest change in how government operates, but it'd be nice to show that eventually the people have to be listened to at some point in time. There's a question here from. Wait a second. So any questions to battle that? So Neil, don't know what you're talking about. Any suggestions to battle that? Neil, send me another question so I know what you're talking about there somewhere. There's a question here from Scooter. What's your opinion on Inslee signing a bill to give back all the money from early 1970s till current on past fines for drug possession and deals? I just think that's a waste of time. I wouldn't have done that. I don't know how much money he's really talking about, but it's kind of a bad form to probably do that, because despite the common opinion, and I'm not a guy that wants to have people in prison for victimless crimes, right? So, but there's 1,000 other crimes out there that have nothing to do with drugs that you can go to jail on, that are ridiculous. So, and I'm generally opposed to that type of over criminalization of the codes. It's a very libertarian approach, but I'm much more libertarian when it comes to how they look at these things. That being said, the going back and refunding all those fines, that seems to be, par for the course. For whatever reason, the Democrats have decided that drug addicts and drug dealers are one of their top clients and or at least constituencies. So they really want these people to support them. I can't believe it's a big percentage of the population. It isn't much, but it just seems like a terrible idea from a policy standpoint. If that can happen, I guess the good thing about it is that it sets the stage for us to get all the fines repealed for all the central planning schemes. So we can use that model and just go back and reimburse everybody who got ripped off by their local planning departments. But I just don't know where that ends. Jason's got a question. Do you think Joe Biden, the figurehead, should be the nominee for 2024? And are we so gone as a country that he'd get reelected? I actually don't know. If you've been tracking this story nationally, the biggest significant thing about that recently is just the change. They say they have these tapes, right, where he's been recorded because the foreign government or the foreign business person wisely recorded phone conversations, 2 of them with Biden, 15 of them with Hunter, that clearly show a quid pro quo bribe scheme. At least that's what we're being told. That just seems like if those tapes come out, and it seems like it's inevitable, they will right now, that probably implies that there'll be a shift within the Democrat Party. Remember, the Republicans are fairly incompetent when it comes to doing anything about this, but there'll probably be a shift at some point in time with the Democrats. So they decide that this guy is too hard to hold up. You're carrying too much dead weight with this senile guy who trips over everything. It's hard for him to be even marginally coherent in public. It's going to be weekend at Bernie's, right? Just trying to run the Biden political campaign. And eventually, I think it gets so hard and exhausting for the people that are supposedly supporting him that I think he gets thrown under the bus. And what do they have to lose? His drug addict kids? And he's senile and lost. It's not like his wife is a big power player. I just think the whole Biden thing crashes at some point in time. It's probably the only path to success the Democrats may have for election is that they do dump Biden and they get somebody else in. I understand why they like a senile figurehead of a person, because it's easier to just run over somebody like that. But and they can kind of get, if he's totally out to lunch, you can totally do what you want as bureaucrats. Bureaucrats love incompetent and brain dead politicians. They love it because it gives them free reign to do what they want, and they just get the politician to rubber stamp them. So that's just generally how it works. Be aware that they like incompetent, bad politicians in there, and the bureaucracy is more powerful than any political party. So I think that's pretty important. Bunky, you have a question. Has Brandy Cruz reached out to you lately? Not lately, but we've talked at the last function that we were both at. I'm sure we'll get together before too long. I think I'll be on her show coming up at some point in time. Let's see. Question to Glenn Oceana here. Have you contacted Chris Ruffo for an interview? He could turn Evergreen College around like he's doing with New College in Florida. I haven't spoken to Chris in a while. I love Chris. I remember talking to him years ago when he first came to Seattle. That was the first time I ever met him, actually. It was down by the I don't think it was a Space Needle, but it was there was a coffee shop that wasn't that far from. It was right downtown Seattle, anyway. I can picture where it is. I'm trying to think of a geographical thing to reference it. It was a little ways away from the Space Needle, but anyway, I remember having a hour-long conversation years ago when he first came in. So I'm a fan of Chris's, always have been. When he ran for the Seattle City Council, it was that would have been amazing if he'd gotten on the council. It would have been a big change. I don't know that he could turn Evergreen State College around. I don't think anybody can. Evergreen State College is probably a lost cause. Sometimes you just have to put something out of its misery when it's just gone so far down the rabbit hole that there's no way to save it. It's lost. So shut her down, steam clean it up, and start over again. And don't start over again with the college. Use it for something else. Especially with the way student enrollment's happening, even in our state. A number of the colleges, Seattle University, SPU, PLU, even Washington State University, they're having substantial collapse in student enrollment occurring. And the music is running out, and there won't be enough chairs left when it comes to the number of students who still want to abuse themselves by going to a wokester higher education school. So when all that money runs out, I think that at some point in time, you just have to recognize some of these schools get shut down. You're not going to be shutting down University of Washington because it's in the state constitution. It's really actually quite protected there. And the land grant schools like Central and Washington State University are probably fairly well protected. But Eastern, Western, and Evergreen are certainly vulnerable. So are a lot of the other private schools, private colleges that have turned themselves into just disaster zones. And those schools are likely to be going under. They're doing rounds of layoffs. If anybody's paying attention to this, a lot of people aren't, but just as somebody has kids looking at colleges and you're going out looking at these schools, you can tell the ones that are basically in a nosedive to the ground. There will not be, the Hunger Games have already started for colleges. Not all of them that are here today are going to be around tomorrow. So and Evergreen State College certainly should be one of the first ones to go. Right. You're having 5 to 10 colleges that go bankrupt roughly and fold around the country a year. My guess is that'll accelerate. You'll have a lot more. State schools can be, you can suspend the failure for a long time by subsidizing them. And Evergreen State College clearly employs a lot of connected political people, but I don't think it lasts forever. No one turns it around, and it's not even worth trying at this point in time. It's better just to let the whole thing go and do something else. There's a question from Pat. Are there plans to put the Nacelle Youth Camp back to use in some realistic, useful way, possibly as housing? Pat, I'm not sure specifically. I have had conversations with some people about it, but I am not current on what those plans would be at the Nacelle Youth Camp. And there's been a lot of resistance with the Democrats in actually doing anything useful out there. They've really been weird about that project, and they've undermined the local control issues that people actually want. So, let's see. Jason, question: if you were on the Seattle City Council, what would be your steps to address homelessness and crime in Seattle? Well, number one, I'd be arresting and putting criminals in jail. And I'd be putting them in there based on their behavior and based on their actions, especially repeat criminals, away for as long as I possibly could. And by doing that, you're sending a message that it's not a great place to be a criminal, and you would be removing it. I would never allow tent cities anywhere in Seattle. They should be swept instantly. And if you keep doing stuff like that, you need to also be dealt with in the sense of your mental health problems, your drug addiction problems, you need to have a drug treatment type facility where you can go and detox for 6 to 18 months and get off of the drugs and give them a chance. Listen, I got a friend of mine from college that became a drug addict. He had every advantage in the world, and that's what he is now, as a drug addict. And, it happened. It can happen to anybody if they decide to go down that road, but they're just going to keep doing it. They will not change if they're not forced to get out. And the only people I know that have gotten off drugs and are no longer drug addicts are the ones who were arrested, or in some cases hospitalized, and they went for a long period of time that they got the detox out of their system. It doesn't mean that they aren't an addict still. They'll still have that desire to still use the drugs, but it gave them that window they needed to get off drugs. And it was the only thing I've seen that works. So if you actually care about these people, you're going to put them in situations like that. Meg, I'm sure you have a question about this. This is funny because this is related to one of my old videos in the past. If you had to guess how many names are in the Black Book, and I'm assuming that you're talking about Bob Ferguson's Black Book of Revenge. I don't know how many names he has. My guess is a couple hundred. I'm sure that I'm not the only one in there, but I'm positive I'm there somewhere. Although I found it quite funny on my records request that Bob Ferguson now claims he doesn't have that. But then again, this guy destroys public records all the time. So why would he not lie and destroy that one? I just thought that was funny. Barbara, you got a question. What does the lottery money pay for? I thought we voted for it because it would be used to help support schools. Great question, Barbara. Yeah, the lottery money, when it was originally sold to the voters of Washington State, was, of course, to support schools, just like everything, right? It's always about the children or the environment or something. It's usually that. And of course, they lied. They lied to us. They knew they were lying to us, but they lied to us, and a majority voted for it. We have a lottery now. And of course, almost none of that money goes to schools. It really just becomes a slush fund that the legislature can draw from and squander on whatever dumb stuff they feel like wasting it on. Mostly to pay for its own incompetent kind of bureaucracy first, and then there's always some little bit that's left, and they sweep those funds and use them for other things. So always remember that whatever the current promises are about money going to schools, they're usually lying to you. Even if the people pushing it now, you can always use some front people that think they're telling you the truth, but it's almost always a lie. Once they get a chance to grab the money, I mean, they grab it and start shoving it into other things. Anyway, that's. I hope I don't sound too positive about government. I don't mean to put them in a good light when it comes to that stuff, but they're exceptionally dishonest when it comes to that kind of stuff. They just are always across the way. Jason, are the enrollment for WSU? Here's a question: are the enrollment for WSU and the other colleges that bad? I was wondering why there was always not that many people on campus. WSU has not historically had bad enrollment. It's had bad enrollment lately. And one of the things you can look for is there's videos students are putting up online right now of dorm rooms that are half empty, right? And that's a pretty good indication that you're not really getting the same kind of enrollment, because there was a time when it was hard to get a dorm and you would have to live off campus and there were other challenges. So it is the way it is. So, but WSU's not alone. It just happens to be one that I know about. TZ question: do we know if China's buying land in Washington State near Lewis McChord? No, I don't know that. I don't know where they are or they aren't. And if they are, they're probably buying it through some company or something. The one thing to remember is that if a foreign country buys land in your own country, and then you seem to be able, as America has done in recent times, of enforcing these rules of seizing property, it's hard to control property that government can just take away from you. Would you go to China and buy land in China? Think about that. I sure wouldn't. And they wouldn't protect that either. If they decided it was time and convenient, they'd take it away from you too. So I'm not sure that I'm not aware of China buying land. I wouldn't want to be selling any land to them near Lewis and McChord, and I'd be concerned if they're trying to do something like that. But anyway, Kraken has a question here. Do you think that they're going to mandate a gun registry? I'm assuming, the feds have always talked. This has always been kind of a dream of the gun the gun grabbers has been to have gun registry, because everybody knows that's the first step to confiscation. So I'm sure that they've liked having this. Listen, I remember when they first were pushing this back in the 90s. They actually tried in the 60s originally, and then it came back around in the 90s. And I wasn't alive in the 60s when they were trying it, but I had to go back and was doing some historical review of what it was. They were trying, and then that got thrown out. So then they tried again in the 90s, 80s. 80s is what I meant, under Reagan. And it was shot down, but it was a close thing at the time. I actually think there's a better pro-gun movement today than there has been, at least in the last 50 years. Stronger, more organized pro-gun movement. It doesn't mean that the NRA is your path to salvation. Don't outsource it to somebody else. But the widespread grassroots pro-2A gun movement and the percentage of people that own firearms today is much higher. All of this is a good thing. So, and I think it's a good thing for our freedom and a good thing to remember moving forward. Okay. Let's see. TZ, yeah. Try to come up with questions for Glenn each week, but there's a sensory overload sometimes with what government wants to do to us. And there is. I mean, and I think you have to be careful about being too overwhelmed by it all. And sometimes you just need to focus on key things. If you want to fix government, and you really want to fix it, and at some point in time, sane and rational people have to get involved. The adults eventually have to come in and take over from the crazy screaming kids. That's what happens eventually. How we get there, I'd prefer it not to be a cataclysmic disaster to get there and cause that to happen. But one way or another, that tends to happen. And so I think that you have to realize that government has to be downsized substantially. There is no practical outcome where there isn't a significant reduction in the size of government to restore your freedom and liberty. And to restore just practical sanity and functioning moving forward, you have to downsize it. No other option. The function of downsizing it solves a lot of your other problems that we experience all around us today. That inevitably means you're going to have to reduce the scope and spectrum of abusive and pointless regulations, wasteful taxes, squandering grant grifting operations. A lot of that stuff just automatically gets taken care of because the left isn't going to operate if somebody's not paying them. They won't. Ever. So take away their money, and it's a lot harder for them. They're eventually going to run out of the billionaires' funds that want to give them money that way. And then that's how you make the changes. One last question, and I think I'll make this the last question before I kind of wrap up. We've been doing this for about an hour. That's about the amount of time that we've done this in the past. Actually, there's two questions here. Sorry, I'll take two of these questions. Jay, there's a question here. Any general tips for getting public records from agencies? And has anyone requested the Black Book data from the Attorney General's office? So, second answer, yes, I requested it. I did file that records request. And Bob Ferguson personally denies that it exists now today. I know he's lying, but that's what he says. And any general tips for getting public records from agencies? Yes, ask for them in digital form. Be clear that it's a RCW 4256 that you're referencing. Number 3, be specific in date range and type of record that you're looking for. And I would generally recommend not doing big, broad, sweeping requests initially. Try some targeted ones first. If you're focused on an agency, get more familiar with how they operate, what you're looking for, and then expand it from there. Also work on recruiting somebody inside the agency so you can get copies of records, whether or not you file a records request. That's a topic for another day. And then the TZ, I think I'm going to have you, I'm going to answer your question. Then Neil, you have another question down here. I'll answer those two. So sorry, I lied. So 2 more questions now. TZ, a question here with the Greater Idaho Project and New California Project, can Washington State split? Well, let's just see that neither of those projects are going anywhere as far as I can tell. So if they actually go somewhere, different ballgame, right? Mostly when you look at this, whether you're looking at Illinois, whether you're looking at New York, California, Oregon, the 21st state or the 51st state, project in Eastern Washington, all of these have a common theme, and it's mostly around the rural-urban divide. And those of us who live rurally want to be nowhere near people who live in the cities. And cities tend to be run by more left-leaning people who can't help themselves but want to control the the rural areas too. It's just a natural thing. So I think that we have to see one succeed first. There hasn't been one since West Virginia broke away from Virginia shortly, right during the Civil War. That's been a long, long time. Haven't seen it happen since then. So we have to see one that actually achieves that goal. And there's a lot of obstacles all those people still have to overcome. Love the fact that they're trying. I'm a cheerleader from the side, but if you can split states, you can also split counties. There's all kinds of different things that can happen and structures that can be changed. And it'd be interesting to see where that goes. And then finally, the last question, and this is the last one I'm going to answer here. This is from Neil. Can you suggest how we battle the smear campaign from the left? And so here's my suggestion. Number one, and I've done some videos about this, right? The enemy of freedom and liberty isn't the crazy left. It's not the bureaucratic bloated state. It's not, it's not those things, even though they are a big part of the problem that we face. The enemy of freedom and liberty is always going to be fear and apathy. Apathy because people want to run away, or they don't think it matters, or they don't want to be involved, or they're going to plan for the apocalypse and live in their bunker, hoping that we'll have a Mad Max scenario and they can come out on top sometime. Whatever the reason, but apathy is part of it, so that people who are apathetic are they don't contribute anything positive to the overall outcome, and so they help the bad outcomes come. Fear is also part of that too. Fear is what drives people to be afraid of speaking up. They're afraid of being canceled. They're afraid of saying anything. And the combination of those two is probably a dominant majority perspective that most people have. If a critical mass of the population, I don't know what that percentage necessarily is, but if that mass it grows or it's bigger, it makes it very hard to fix some of the problems. You need people who fit into those categories to lose their fear and their apathy and to engage with us and to be involved. So those are the things that we really have to remember to fight against. So that's part of it. But then the other part is the left attacks you. Whatever, I've been attacked many times. You can't let that change as long as you're doing the right thing, you can't let that change your actions or behavior. And recognize when somebody's being unfairly attacked, stand by their side, right? Help them out. You can't go and run away from any friend that gets attacked by the left just because they get attacked by the left. And yet you see people do that all the time. So stand by those who are being unfairly attacked, and don't be afraid when it happens to you. Again, I've had a lot more happen to me than I would expect most people ever would. And I'm still here, and I'm still hammering away, and I'm still doing my best to try to make an impact. You can do the same. You don't have to be the same as me, and you don't have to do the same thing I do. I don't think that's the path to success. You find your own passion, your own focus, whatever it is that you care about. Stay engaged and focus with that. Find some other people so you're not alone, and find projects and goals that you can work on. Don't outsource it to a party. Don't outsource it to an association. Find solutions and things you can work on locally. And I think that you'll find that as you get successes and develop skills in that process, that you're going to be able to actually move the ball further down the road than you actually think. So with that, I just want to, I hope that this helps everybody. I hope people enjoyed this. Let me know what you think about this later time. I'm not sold on it yet. So let me know if this later time works better for you or not. If you have any other suggestions, please feel free to kind of add those comments down below when this video publishes. If you're watching this after the live stream's over, feel free to put those comments in. I do try to respond to any comments, even older ones that come up in historic live streams. So I hope these are helpful to you guys. I have a presentation coming up Thursday night in the 47th Ledge District. I know I'm going to be speaking out there up in Kent. So I look forward to seeing you there. If you're in Kent, I don't know where my other presentations after that, but I have a few more coming up, I think, at the end of the month. For those of you who saw me and who I had a chance to chat with up in Skagit County, or over in Wenatchee or Walla Walla, or any of the other places I've been just recently in the last week or two, it's always fun to meet you. Please make sure you make a point of coming up and introducing yourself to me. I really appreciate those who are willing to take the time to watch my live stream, comment on my videos, share and subscribe, all that good stuff. Without you, I wouldn't have a channel, and nothing I say would matter anyway. So I really appreciate the fact that you guys are willing to listen. Hopefully I'm providing you some value and hopefully a little bit of inspiration along the way. And I'll end this like I end most of my other videos. The future does belong to those who show up. So make sure you find something to show up for in your community. And we will see you next time.